Hi, everyone. This is Lee Perry. Welcome to the Organizing to Victory podcast, where we are talking garage politics. In today's episode, I interview Matthew Grocholske, a 21-year-old activist who's on the front lines of fighting fascism on the ground. We get into a conversation about organizing in Florida, what the future of our progressive movement can be here, and how to attract Gen Z, the next generation, into the political movement. Thanks for listening. Now let's get into my conversation with Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Matthew Grocholske, the president of the Florida Progressive Caucus and the secretary of Florida Young Dems. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hey, Lee. I'm okay. How are you?
So good. So honored that you get to be my first guinea pig of my garage politics.
I love the backdrop. I really do.
Yeah. Well, I would be honored to have you get a token and put it on the back there at some point. So I created this podcast because, obviously we want to talk politics because that's all we ever do. But I don't think we really know each other. And I think we're always in a lot of spaces where we get to know people based on, the caucuses and the events that we're constantly doing together. But we don't know what drives one another into this space. And I feel like right now, with all of the chaos that's going on in the world, it feels so easy to want to just run away from politics. But if you knew more about the people who are running towards it, I feel like we would all feel more united in wanting to gravitate deeper into this work. And so I want to learn a little bit about you and learn, first of all of the things that you're doing, and maybe share a little backstory about what did little baby Matt decide to do politics wise? When did that light bulb go off in your head?
Yeah. So I first really got involved because of the unfortunate Parkland tragedy.
Okay.
I was in middle school and my aunt from Georgia called my mom and she was just in tears because she saw Land, Florida school shooting on the news. I lived in Lakeland at the time. So she was traumatized calling my mom because she had no clue what she was seeing, if I was in school or anything like that. She didn't know if it was high school, middle school, what school. And I think at that moment, seeing so many people traumatized in South Florida, being in Central Florida as well, I knew that, gun violence is a major Florida problem. It is, to me, a problem nationwide. It's an American problem, but specifically it is, unfortunately, facing an epicenter in the state of Florida. And we've seen it for years. We saw it with the unfortunate tragedy of Pulse. We saw it in Jacksonville. We've seen it in Lakeland, even my own community that I was raised in. So I helped orchestrate a walkout of my middle school. It was very successful. And then, I thought after that, and we got some gun violence prevention legislation passed, that I would not have to do any of this organizing or political stuff ever again. And that was definitely not what happened. I served as a teacher's administrator for my library, my media center. And that was the year that we saw the far right group, Moms for Liberty, and all these other crazy groups really take over our school boards locally.
Yeah.
And I just sat there as a TA for my media center where I signed up for this job to just really help students access literature, access computers, and also just have a good education. And instead, I was put into representing my school and my generation before these book review committees. And I testified at them. I'd be the student ambassador.
How old were you then?
This certain book. It was probably when I was 17. And I just remember seeing so much terrible stuff happen at my school board. I identify as LGBT. I'm non-binary, bisexual. And I saw firsthand the hate that would come out at the school board locally. And I think my real defining moment was moving back to the state of Florida, because I was so sick and tired of seeing so much crazy stuff come from my home state while I just attended 1 year of college in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Dropped out of college, moved back down here because I saw a 6-week abortion ban. I saw the state try to increase attacks on LGBT individuals in my community. And the first month I came back, that was actually when Polk County, my home county at the time, decided to remove pride proclamations from its school board. And that was devastating. That was something that was never political in Polk County. You know, we had a mostly Republican conservative school board for years. It was Polk County, you know, pretty Republican area, but they always respected students that were LGBT. They always officially respected educators that were LGBT. And we saw, because of the politicization of our school boards locally, the fact that our school board just did not care. They thought that LGBT students and educators and faculty were on the chopping block, and it was perfectly okay to put them on the chopping block. So I organized. I fought like hell to get students to the school board. Fortunately, they still removed those pride proclamations. And Polk County now has gone from a pretty fair school board to one that does not really care about LGBT students, doesn't care about the local union. The union negotiations were months long. It's absurd how that school board has, unfortunately, due to one election cycle back in 2022, where DeSantis listed it as his target school board in the state, to just become the mess it is now. So, you know, I did a lot of school board advocacy, lots of fighting for LGBT students and individuals. But I think my biggest thing that really pushed me out to becoming a part of this world ultimately was back in 2023. I was evicted and I unfortunately became unhoused. And I would sleep in my car in the terrible Florida heat, wake up sweating, just like absolutely sweating, having to go to, you know, a bathroom at like Taco Bell, McDonald's, etc., to just, you know, change, because it was so sweaty that I could not wear my shirt again for like the rest of the week because it was so nasty. And I realized how interconnected truly all these issues are. The issues of climate justice, the issues of housing justice. I was priced out of Polk County. I had to move over here with the assistance of State Representative Escamani, actually, who was able to help me find housing. I saw, you know, the issues of public transit, congestion. You know, I would clock into a 40+ hour work week at a movie theater to try and make ends meet. I definitely couldn't. So I saw, you know, the benefits of things like labor unions, of actually, you know, having fair employment practices, etc. And I always held those values. I always did. You know, I was directly inspired by the Bernie Sanders campaign back in 2016, but I, for the first time, was able to really understand that these issues are not just issues on paper. They're issues that are impacting everyday Floridians. They're impacting people in America, regardless of your zip code. And that we do need organizers and fighters that actually do fight, that understand the interconnectedness of those issues and understand how they are real and not just fake.
Right.
So that's how I got involved.
I just find it so interesting that you were in DC, politically inclined already at a young age, and that the fights that were happening in Florida were like ground zero for you, and you felt like you had to come back to fight fights that it's usually the other way around. Like people that are born in Florida, politically leaning, are usually kind of poached to go up to Washington, D.C., because, you know, that's where a lot of the work is. But you decided to run into the fight where people's rights were actively being taken away.
Yeah. Well, you know, I did definitely attend tons of demonstrations and protests. I think one of my favorite moments of my life was standing with indigenous Hawaiians for water rights.
Mm-hmm.
And then also standing with our revolution against a pipeline that Senator Manchin of West Virginia proposed. I thought those were really cool things, but I did not feel like I was organizing. And I felt like I was just kind of a member of the crowd. So when I really thought about how there's so many people going to DC from all across the country, and then the people that I held closest to my heart living here in Central Florida, I knew that I wanted to move back to fight for them and be with them on the ground to make sure that they at least had that support network that I really felt like they needed.
So you came into Orange County's orbit so fast. I remember just thinking like, whoa, this person is going to become an elected official. Like that was the one thing I knew from the first second that I met you, is that you were so in tuned that I was like, okay, I can totally see your arc, not knowing how young you were and how involved you were with everything. But you know, now you're a leader in so many spaces in a time when I think people are actively running away from politics. And so I'm curious, like, why you keep loading on your plate in this moment and like where your head is at. What do you think your goals are right now in all these leadership positions that you're starting to gravitate towards?
Well, I think the main reason that I'm adding so much on my plate right now is to make sure that we do have leaders in those spaces. In the Florida Democratic Party, unfortunately, we do have a pretty sad caucus system statewide. We have a lot of caucuses that do not have above 50 members statewide, which I think is insane because I feel like we can get 50 members in Orange County alone.
Like in a week, you know?
Yeah. And I think about how those caucuses and those groups that are super important to actually building the movement that we need to actually get leaders that we deserve are just not being filled right now. So I decided to run for president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus because I saw a need to actually harness the progressive energy in the state and make sure that always had this partner caucus to make sure that we can actually get good elected Democrats.
Right.
So I think that we don't have that many good elected Democrats in the state of Florida. I really don't.
I'm so excited to dissect what you mean about that.
Yeah. You know, that's a whole can of worms that we'll get into very soon. But, you know, I saw the Florida Young Democrats, which I think was ran by an amazing person in Cole Gabriel, who served as the president for the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, he was not able to have a good team elected around him that really did want to do the consistent work to make that caucus and that organization what truly can be in the state of Florida. We have people like Maxwell Alejandro Frost elected as the first Gen Z member of Congress.
Yeah.
But we don't previously, we did not have a great infrastructure around the Florida Young Democrats to replicate his success outside of Central Florida and to also have that success be in Jacksonville, Miami, Tampa, etc. We didn't have that infrastructure. So I put so much on my plate so that I think that these organizations at least have a leader that is dedicated, because I am the type of person that lives off of stipends and like $2,000 a month to make sure that these unpaid positions have good leaders so that then down the line we can get good replacement leaders.
Yeah.
Because that is something that has been absent from the Florida Democratic Party and the Democratic ecosystem for years, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that we need leaders that actually understand that and will fight like hell in those positions, because we haven't seen it.
I mean, I think there's so many reasons, so many factors as to why we don't have as wide of a base in all these different caucuses, and B, why we don't have like leadership growing, you know, every year, every generation. I really feel like a few things. One, Florida is just a sprawling hellscape that if you don't have a car, you're already in a disadvantaged place. If you can't keep up with the, you know, price increases and everything from, property insurance to rent to groceries to all the things. It's like you're already behind.
Yeah.
And then you don't really know your neighbors because everything is suburban sprawl. And so it's really hard, to organize. You have to leap through all these barriers in order to really make sure that people are consistently being informed and consistently coming to the table and being invited. And so there's already a lot of hurdles there. And then just being compensated enough to be able to give us enough time to build on those things. And I think one thing that I feel like you and I have a lot in common, because I did a lot of this in my youth as well, is just be okay with being broke, but working your ass off. It's almost like the people who are screwing our planet the most are people who are working really, really, really hard to get quadruple paid. And that's their motive, is to get paid. Whereas you and I can be broke, but would work our ass off for either free or very minimal compensation, because our payment is the return on building something that we hope, I think, will lead to progress, like political progress, building a caucus that will have new leaders come in and be able to take the reins and lead it without, and then you'll be able to go and help another caucus or another movement or what have you. Am I hitting the nail on the head, or am I missing anything?
No, absolutely. And I want to actually kind of respond to your point about income. One of my biggest gripes with the Florida Democratic Party and the Democratic ecosystem is that our biggest networking events aren't really socials or anything like that. They're galas. They're galas that are hosted in 5-star hotels that are not union hotels, by the way. They're never union hotels. Some of them have spotty donation history. Like Leadership Blue this year, which is the Florida Democratic Party's biggest annual fundraiser, was hosted at a hotel that the Florida LGBT Democratic Caucus had to boycott because it was ran by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, which has made donations to Ron DeSantis, political enemies and opponents of the Florida Democratic Party. They're also not union either.
Right.
So it's definitely, that's one of the biggest things that I have gripes with, is how we do set up barriers in the Democratic Party, which is supposed to be the party of the working class, to make sure that our actual working class champions have to spend a lot of money to get ahead in this Democratic Party, in this Democratic ecosystem. And thankfully, as a young person, lots of rich old people feel okay with giving me a free ticket, for example. But I think about those people that are older, because this movement has to be multi-generational, that are too low income to afford gala tickets and these hotels and all these crazy ventures, that then feel like they can't run for office because the Florida Democratic Party has that income barrier. I think that's one of my biggest gripes with organizing here in the state of Florida.
Well, since you opened up the can of worms first, after the election, where unfortunately Kamala Harris didn't make it over the finish line, I've listened to so many podcasts and so many takes on what Democrats could have done better or should do better moving forward. And it's very rare that I hear young people talk about what they did or did not like, or what they felt they saw that they gravitated towards or ran away from in the last election. And I'd love to talk about that on a national scale, and then bring it down to like Florida and where our opportunities lie and where we're just dropping the ball again and again. Yeah. So maybe we'll start with like the election, your take on what went well, and then where do we go wrong?
Yeah. All things considered, because I have been somebody who has seen some internal polling, of course, not the same amount as people who actually worked on the Biden campaign. I think Harris did do electorally probably the best that she could have.
Yeah.
The economy, of course, is not doing great. And that's something that I think Democrats, Republicans can both agree on, is that this economy is not working for all. And it's really not here in the state of Florida specifically, because we do have, the homeowners insurance crisis, for example. But I think as well, that Biden dropped out way too late.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest balls that the Democratic Party kept on trying to stop in its tracks almost. And I never understood it. President Biden, when he was first elected, said that he was going to be a one-term president, that he was going to allow a next generation to take hold in the Democratic Party. And shocker, Vice President Harris is not that young. She is still pretty older in relation to some other Democrat candidates that we've seen want to run for president.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with the fact that President Biden was already disliked due to the economy, he was disliked in, progressive spaces due to the ongoing genocide in Gaza, which I think the DNC did not respond to at all.
Yeah.
Well enough. I think that they should have allowed a Palestinian American speaker speak at the DNC. I thought that was a no-brainer almost.
Which they had, and the speech was vetted and approved.
Right.
And it still was cut.
Yeah.
But then they should have cut the Israeli families that spoke to make it fair. Yeah. But they let them speak and not the other. And I think that really, for me, put a bad taste in my mouth.
Right. And I think one of the biggest problems that is unspoken is the fact that we did have a DNC chair at the time nationally that was not challenging the administration on anything and felt like he had to side with the federal administration on every single issue, in Jamie Harrison. And I don't think that's what the DNC needs to do. I don't think the DNC just needs to be a spokesperson for the president and whoever is the presidential nominee. I think it shouldn't be afraid to step the presidential nominee aside and say, hey, this is working and this is not working. I felt like the DNC very much did not actually criticize in good faith the president or the nominee or anything like that.
I think a lot of people were scared. I feel like Trump is such a threat. And I think even now on the other side of the election, knowing how bad things are, I think it's worse than what people were even afraid of back then. So I think justifiably people were afraid. But I mean, this is just going to slightly segue into one of my next questions about why we even have caucuses and why we even have these siloed groups within the broader umbrella of Democratic candidates and Democratic parties, is that we're trying to talk to different audiences because things change over time. People become more moderate, people become more liberal. And I really feel like the progressives, and I'd love to hear your definition of a progressive, but I feel like the progressives really have the ability to talk to that economic hardship in a way that overlaps with, I think, the reason why, really hard for me to wrap my mind around, people would think Trump would be that change candidate that would help fight as a businessman and knock people down until they submit to the, cost increases and, make a deal with tariffs. Like, I think the illusion of that message was that they wanted change and they wanted relief now. And Democrats have a really hard time when they're trying to be this big umbrella to frankly bring in more conservative and moderate voices because they think that they've just got the liberals locked, that, they're scared to push back on their donors and they're scared to push back on the wealthy, demographics within their party. And so they don't hit on those economic points as loudly. And then when you have a president that can't message well, even on some of his wins, like the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the largest climate policies that have ever been passed that created hundreds of thousands of jobs and helped stimulate the economy, he couldn't even articulate his wins in a consistent way. And so all of that, I think, confolded into this knot. And that's where we got Trump.
Yeah. And with respect to the president, I don't think he could articulate a lot, especially in that last debate. It was mind-boggling as an abortion rights organizer and activist, how terribly he answered questions about abortion. It was
Right.
horrible. But I think the purpose of caucuses is actually perfectly represented by another gripe I had with the presidential election and what happened. In the last presidential election, they sent President Clinton to Dearborn to talk to constituents and rally constituents, get the vote for Vice President Harris. But President Clinton has a horrible record with what is going on in the Middle East. He has a horrible record. And he talked down to Palestinian protesters and organizers. And Dearborn is one of the most Palestinian American areas in the country. And Dearborn actually voted for Trump. Even though it used to be a 90% Democratic area, it actually swung the most in the country to Donald Trump. And I think that is a perfect representation of why we need caucuses, so that we have organizations inside the Democratic Party that can keep the broader Democratic Party in check to make sure that stuff like that never happens again. And that we actually have communicators and messengers inside the Democratic Party that can communicate a message to their respective constituency the best, because they are in that constituency. Yeah. I personally think that caucuses also really do encourage discussion and dialogue. We had a caucus president say something statewide that was very inflammatory towards the LGBT community, in my opinion. Okay. And thankfully, our LGBT caucus president was able to keep her in check and say that, you know, even though you don't think it's offensive, because you thought it was just a tongue-in-cheek like comment, for example, it was actually deeply offensive to me as a trans person. And I think that's the exact type of thing as to why we keep caucuses, so that we know that we're actually aligned with the Democratic Party's values on those issues that those constituencies feel are super important to their own identity. And I think that we've seen that largely play out in the Florida Democratic Party, where our caucuses are now becoming more vocal, which I think is great. We've never seen, maybe this was a thing back in 2018, but we haven't seen since about 2022 our caucuses be as vocal as they are until now. Right. I think that's an absolutely amazing thing. And it does lead to a lot more discussion in our party. I get lots of calls from caucus presidents asking for my opinion on X, Y, and Z. Then we have a dialogue. And that's something that I don't think previously we've seen largely in the Florida Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think some issues are just really new. It's not that trans rights are new. I think trans people have been around since human beings have existed. But I think some of these conversations are finally getting air. And I think some people that probably align with us on most things just don't know how to communicate on those issues as well. And so I think it's really great to have the caucus infrastructure. But specifically as a progressive, right, I feel like right now, we now know what it looks like to play middle of the road and to campaign with Liz Cheney, right? We now know what it looks like to be as quiet as possible on the issues that we think are divisive, that we are scared to push people away. We now know what that looks like in comparison to a Mamdani election that came out swinging, very vocal, non-apologetic about the policies that serve the working class families the most. And I feel like the silver lining to all of this horror that's coming in from the Trump administration is that progressives have an opportunity now, because the cards, I feel, were not in our hands in the last election at all. In fact, some people are still trying to blame too left of a message coming from Kamala Harris is the reason why she failed. But I point to an example because I'd love to hear it. I'm curious how you define progressive and why right now you feel is the time to get all of these progressive chapters in order and start building right now. Because just I'd love to hear your take on this too. I feel like there's a lot of political strategists that are looking at Florida and thinking, we got to talk as red as possible. How do we mold to the Republican talking points as much as possible to try and bring in all of these marginalized Republicans that didn't vote for Trump's most extreme moment, which he's having right now. And so we got to bring them in. We have to find a way to align with them, put our cowboy hats on, and say things that we think could attract them, ignoring trans rights, getting quiet on abortion. Like, I feel like there's strategists in a room right now figuring out how to flip Florida by doing that instead of leaning into a progressive message. Tell me what you define progressive as and what this moment means for the progressive movement.
Well, I would define progressive as a visionary, somebody that actually wants to fight for real transformative change, that understands that lots of these issues that we put on candidate platforms, for example, are all interconnected issues, and that to actually fight for justice in our communities, we need to fight for justice on all fronts and all issues. So I don't think it is just an issue-based list, right? I think that, of course, we do have progressives that are not as strong on a certain issue, such as Medicare for all, for example. Definitely still believe that, but will champion other issues like the Green New Deal. I think that those are still, to me, progressives. I think, though, that we, of course, do have standard ideas and standard values because, again, all issues are interconnected, right? And there is, to me, a true definition of actual justice, and that is not infringing on the rights of people, even if they are not in this own country. Mm-hmm. So that includes Gaza. Mm-hmm. I think it is actually fighting for true environmental justice and change, because those issues that we see on the environmental front are racist. Mm-hmm. They are actually homophobic as well. We've seen some of the highest dense LGBT communities get disproportionately impacted by climate change. And we see that abroad as well. So I think that, overall, it's definitely somebody who is actually a visionary and will break the mold and actually want transformative change, because the status quo and the oligarchy that we do have in power right now, it's just not it. As for building all these progressive chapters across the state, when I was first elected as Democratic Progressive Caucus president, we only had 2 chapters in the whole state of Florida. We had Polk County and Miami-Dade. And now I think we're at, off the top of my head, I think we're at 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. And that, I was elected president about 2 months ago. So I think the real reason as to why I am fighting so hard on that front, some people have actually criticized this idea that I do have, is because I think that people organize their communities the best because they actually know what is going on in their cities, their municipalities, jurisdictions, etc. There's a special election going on in Tampa for city council because, unfortunately, one of the city councilors passed away this year. Wow. And there is about 15 people running to replace her in an election that I think is happening in September. I have no clue who's the best candidate. I have no clue who's actually progressive. Mm-hmm. There's even some folks that are running that are actually Republicans that in Florida politics are wearing Hillsborough County Young Democrat shirts. But because they used to be a Young Dem back in 2018, but now they're a Republican. So I have no clue who's the best candidate. I have no clue who's actually speaking to the issues. I have no clue who's going to win the election. Mm-hmm. So I'm an outsider. So that was something that I brought up when the Hillsborough County Progressive Caucus just became a chapter again, is that you have these types of elections where, as a statewide person, I will not know all the elections happening in your community. I will not know of all the events happening in your community. I would love for you to localize and fight for the candidate that you think is the best, to go to the events that you think actually will bring change and charity to your community. I'm not going to know all of them.
Yeah.
I have no clue what's happening even in Seminole County, which is right up the road from me.
Mm-hmm.
I have no clue what's happening locally in those issues. So I think that community-based organizing is something that we desperately do need in the state of Florida. Again, we need year-round organizing in all these communities. And I think that is why I fought so hard for progressive chapters to start. And the Mayor and County Progressive Caucus on second meeting got about 35 people.
Right.
So they're doing something. They know how to work their own community. I, as somebody who lives in Orange County, was only able to get 15 of those folks to go their first meeting. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the exact type of change that I really am looking forward to in the state, is actually build a bench and infrastructure that matters.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the policies that make a progressive a progressive. Like when you watch any candidate that's a Democrat speak, what are some key things that people should look out for coming out of their mouth that you think, okay, that sounds like a progressive?
We just had a special election happen in Arizona for Congress, and I firmly resonated with this Gen Z candidate that ran named Deja Fox. But my problem with supporting Deja was that she never mentioned the Green New Deal. Mm-hmm. And if you, again, seriously do believe in a progressive vision, I think that we need all-around transformation. And not mentioning something like the Green New Deal is a massive red flag to me. And the Green New Deal has now, unfortunately, seemingly became an unpopular thing for Democratic candidates to spread. It used to be something that lots of progressive candidates would talk about, and candidates that would love to identify as progressive would mention. That's something that we're not actually seeing as much right now.
I almost feel like it needs a rebrand because Trump has just been dragging it so terribly.
Absolutely. And I think that, the Green New Deal is amazing in so many aspects, but we could also have like a Blue New Deal, and we could just overall have a giant climate package that includes the oceans, etc. I do seriously love the Green New Deal, but I think that it needs to be expanded, and that we can also work to have different type of more local Green New Deals. I thought one of the saddest things from the Green New Deal that didn't happen was municipals and municipalities really planning their own Green New Deal version. I thought when I first got involved locally that some organizations would champion like an Orlando Green New Deal or an Orlando New Deal, an Orange New Deal for the county, and that just never happened.
Yeah, just for folks who don't really know what the Green New Deal is, all of the trillions of dollars that we give to our military, imagine if we could give a fraction of that for people to have clean jobs with living wages, union jobs, doing projects that could perpetuate renewable energy, help with reforestation efforts, help combat climate issues, and really help stimulate local economies by doing this work. Right now, we're putting more money into bombing children than we are to fighting climate change in a holistic, real way. And I think when people hear now Trump say Green New Scam, they have found a way to weaponize people's mistrust for the government, to fearmonger any policies that Democrats have been able to kind of pave the way and explain could be an economic return on our communities. And it's really unfortunate because people are scared of waste and fraud in our government. And I think that's something that can go across all demographics of people, regardless of party dynamics. But not every social, fund is fraud. And being able to explain that we need to reinvest money that we're already spending on things that do not give you a return, like the bombs that we're dropping abroad. I just don't know if people, I hope that this progressive wave that I feel is coming will be an opportunity to explain that cutting humanitarian aid or cutting, thousands of jobs within the government that helped us in research and medicine and human health, that is not the way that we want our country to go. And instead, we want to fund jobs in that direction. So that's one example of progressive policies, but it's very intersectional.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that I always look forward to hearing is a candidate rejecting corporate PAC money.
Right.
And I think it's kind of the defining issue that really does showcase, how candidates actually feel. A candidate is not going to support Medicare for all if they take big pharma money. A candidate is not going to support real environmental protections if they're taking tons of developer money.
Yeah.
And a candidate also is not going to support actual humanitarianism if they're taking APAC money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so many candidates do not openly reject corporate PAC money, especially locally in the state of Florida. And I think that when they get elected to office, we see, everything that we speculated based off of their donors becomes true. We see it so much on the municipal level when it comes to development. When developers bankroll a campaign, wow, shocker, they're not the best on actual housing justice and environmental justice that actually, includes protections for the east side of Orange County and the west side of Orange County.
They might throw a bone here or there, but they're not fighting as hard as we know they could, especially if they're Democrats. We know that affordable housing is a number one issue. This is the part that really breaks my brain, because doing campaigns, people say, well, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight, meaning you need money to win elections. And we're outspent by Republicans, who do take plenty of corporate money, by almost 4 times. But that whole point of weaponizing the mistrust of the government that Trump is so good at, but also what I think Dems have an opportunity to do is to wield that and say, weaponize the mistrust in corporations. Because I feel like that is in both parties. Both bases feel that they can't trust their drinking water. They can't trust that their kids are going to go to an institution and be able to graduate and get a living wage. There's so much, they can't trust that they're going to go to a doctor and be given an amount to pay at the beginning and then be hit with a bill that they didn't anticipate after their visit. That could be crippling for a family. Yeah. So there's so many opportunities to hit that point over and over and over again. But Democrats are so terrified to not take the money, because I've heard it so many times in campaigns. I'll take anybody's money, but that doesn't mean I need to listen to them. What do you think about that? You do
listen to them.
But then you do.
You do. And it is reflected in your votes. I think that in the state of Florida, we have this really terrible problem where I think the statistic I saw was about 80% of our biggest donors actually donate out of state. They don't donate to Florida candidates. And those are people that, definitely are wealthy, but they're not exactly representative of developers. They're not exactly representative of APAC, for example. They're just people that want to elect Democrats. And we've seen that, nationally. They donate to Pennsylvania Senate election. They donate millions of dollars to Vice President Harris. President Biden, during his actual campaign, his re-election campaign, came down here. I think he got like $5 million from just one fundraiser, and just being physically present. So that's a lot of money that can go to congressional elections. And that was actually one of the highest amounts that he got at an actual physical fundraiser that he hosted during his re-election campaign. That was in Florida. So we have real donors that actually are here in the state of Florida that are not exactly that corporate type. They're rich, but they're not exactly representing a corporation or an entity. So I think about how our politics, unfortunately, has been not trying to actually harness that power that we do have. I think that financial power that we do have in the state of Florida, but also the volunteer power that we have in the state as well. Locally, an amazing thing is that all of our elections end up being field margin elections where door knocking and phone banking really does determine the election.
For sure.
But in places like Polk County, for example, unfortunately, corporate money is what determines elections. And I think that we desperately need to break that mold statewide. And I think one of the best ways to do it is actually by implementing a policy in our state Democratic Party that is called Stop Big Money. Stop Big Money was proposed in the state of Arizona and their Democratic Party. They actually passed a resolution to investigate how they can ban corporate PAC money in their Democratic Party and their primaries. And that's something I think we desperately need in the state of Florida. To kind of start this big rant about FDP, our chair, Nikki Fried, is looking at opening up primaries to NPA voters. I personally think this is a disaster in the making. I am for open primaries, but not for open primaries that are only for one certain group. What we're going to see is our base and our Democratic Party electorate become less Black, less woman-oriented, and less progressive. That is the exact research that Chair Fried actually has. Those are the three biggest demographics that are impacted by opening up primaries. People like Jason Pizzo, who just left the party, was a walking disaster in the state Senate, is going to be able to vote in the Democratic primary again.
But not the Republican.
Not the Republican.
But isn't the fastest growing political designation among Gen Z is NPA?
So, yes, but I would actually format it to be that, as we all know, Gen Z is trying to understand fully the political spirit. And we've been forced to understand it locally in the state of Florida. But I think that Gen Z doesn't fully understand what the Democratic Party is standing for because we haven't been fighting. We haven't been staying on business as a party locally and nationally. So I think that we see that highest chunk, of course, being Democrats, but they're Democrats that need to be talked to.
Yeah.
I do seriously understand the argument that there are a lot of Gen Z MPs. But I think that opening up the primaries isn't a way to actually talk to them. It's a way for them to grab a ballot, see a bunch of names, checkbox. They're not being talked to about the issues. They're not talking to their neighbors about how the Democratic Party,
which I think is true even without the open primary situation, because I think the whole reason why in Florida so many Gen Z are putting NPA is because they don't even realize that they're not going to have the ability to vote in a primary.
Absolutely. And it kind of goes back to that point about Stop Big Money. I think that the biggest consequence of opening up these primaries, besides the massive loss for some of the Democratic Party's biggest constituencies, is the fact that we're going to see a lot of billionaires and millionaires like Elon Musk spend money in Democratic primaries so that more conservative candidates win. And when the field opens up to be a whole different universe of voters that are not just registered Democrats, they're also MPAs that we have no clue what they actually fully believe in, we're going to see dark money really harness that ability and actually start to fully influence our elections to a whole different level in the Florida Democratic Party's ecosystem. Elon Musk put Maxwell Frost as one of his biggest targets in a primary. That's going to be a whole new door wide open for Elon to spend as much money as he wants, to talk to MPAs first before the Democratic Party can, to tell them, hey, you should actually vote against Maxwell Frost instead of here's all the issues that you can actually believe in, etc. So I think it is a nightmare scenario waiting for the Florida Democratic Party and the progressive movement to actually open up primaries right now.
What's her strategy? I'm hoping that she has some political team members in her, orbit trying to debate every pro and con in this. Like, what is she hearing or saying that is why she's pushing for this?
It is because of a dark money donor. There is a certain donor that will spend millions of dollars on the Florida Democratic Party if we open up the primaries. He's not a registered Democrat. He's a registered MPA. He's the exact type of person that tried to put this ballot initiative to impact all state parties. I think he thinks that, unfortunately, the Florida Democratic Party is desperate enough to open up our primary. So he's leeching the Florida Democratic Party right now.
Because we're so behind in our voter registration numbers that we need more people to have buy-in. I'm just trying to stretch out what the train of thought must be. Like, if NPAs have a say in the primary process, then maybe they'll be more likely to vote for their pick in the general election later down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the train of thought that the party is going to officially state. I do think is mostly because of dark money interests. I really firmly believe that. I mean, we're already seeing conservative candidates masquerade as Democratic Party candidates. We're seeing that locally in an Orlando State Commission election, where a so-called Democrat is actually funded by Republicans, including the former treasurer of Byron Donalds.
Yeah.
Which is absurd that is happening. But I think that's what we're going to see when we open up primaries statewide, is those exact type of elections are going to happen, where those candidates actually have a chance at winning because they have so much money behind them that it's going to overwhelm our volunteers and our field organizers in the state. And
so then non-party affiliated candidates will also be on the ballot. So someone who's running as like an independent,
not in the primary, but they can definitely change to be a Democrat to then effectively, open it up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what, even if this doesn't go forward, we're going to have a lot of dark money, a lot of candidates that say, I mean, we have candidates that are Republicans that change their designation based on their race demographics, and they run as Democrats just to, Joe Manchin. He's an example. But I think that's interesting. And I find it shameful that we don't have a ton of money for voter registration, and we're not fighting for that, but we're turning around and trying to open up our primaries without trying to make it fair and have the Republicans open up their primaries.
Well, the funniest thing about the whole argument to me, it's not funny, it's actually really sad, is that the chair has said that they're going to spend at least $400,000 on legal fees to fight for this initiative.
Right, which is a lot of money.
Our state budget was amended at the budget vote to include $100,000 to Hispanic outreach, $100,000 to rural outreach, $100,000 to Black outreach, $100,000 to Black youth outreach. So $400,000 could be allocated to constituency recognition, outreach, etc. The chair has actually said that she refuses a fundraise for that $400,000 that actually will target and talk to voters. Instead, we're going to spend that $400,000 on legal fees. And that is at least $400,000, because realistically, when we're going to fight the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, we're going to spend a lot more money than $400,000. It's going to be millions. It's going to cut into staff, for example. It's going to cut into digital fundraising that the party can do. And maybe it will cut into the transportation of the chair, which is being funded pretty well. So I think that's my biggest gripe right now, is that we're not actually funding all these thousands of dollars on actual outreach and talking to people. Instead, we're spending the money on this idea of maybe being able to talk to people. which is just ridiculous to me. I just don't understand it, and I can't wrap my mind around it either.
Well, I want to go back to, talking about how Orange County has a really great opportunity because of the margins here being able to really be made by grassroots organizing. Out of the top 10 most flippable districts in the state, like 6 of them are here in Central Florida. And so I think even if we are a little bit on our own, I think there's still a really great opportunity in continuing to build here. And frankly, candidate quality, I think, is where we should really start. Building that network of volunteers and all of those things. That's all great, especially if caucuses are leading that. But really good candidates with a strong agenda, something that is passionate, that makes people gravitate towards them, that, in my opinion, will really help stimulate that on the ground work, because people want to sweat for people that they believe in. And trust me, caucuses have great missions and we want to knock on doors for LGBTQ rights, all the things. But like when you have a really good candidate, like what Anna Eskamani has been able to accomplish in building this army of people, and not just 1 or 2 canvases, annual outreach, even on off election years, to make sure that people are getting their reminder to re-register for their vote by mail, or making sure that people have hurricane relief information, or just this incredible infrastructure that frankly could be done by all the caucuses. Yeah. And then no Republican will want to step foot and try to, put money into our elections, because they'll know that they're just doomed. If we don't have that strength in numbers and that constant passion fueling the movement, then there's such a window of opportunity from the Republican side to penetrate into what we're building here and get even just one Moms for Liberty person on our school board has now wafted such hatefulness at our school board in such crazy religious talking points that I just never thought I would ever see on our school board, a place where people shouldn't be trying to force one religion over everything else in an education space. But anyway, we have such an opportunity to build that here and to toe the line with or without the statewide party being involved.
Yeah, and I think that we'll see a lot more exciting candidates really run for office in the coming years. I think that we're going to see a lot more young candidates actually file for office and run for office and win. The last time statewide we were actually a competitive state was because of a younger Black progressive man. Mm-hmm. Same was Andrew Gillum. Mm-hmm. And he got so close on a platform that included Medicare for all, a Green New Deal. He was backed by Bernie Sanders. And I think that is the type of energy that we do need back in the state of Florida. But one of the things that I think people don't emphasize enough about Andrew Gillum is that he made his election so emotional. Mm. There was this aura around him that, he came from nothing. He's this candidate that honestly should not have broken the traditional mold. He was a mayor of Tallahassee that spoke to people in a whole different way.
Yeah.
And when Andrew Gillum lost, I was really sad that Andrew Gillum lost. But I was in the Senate election, I was more upset that Rick Scott won than Bill Nelson lost. So that's the type of thing that I think we need to really set the standard for our candidates, is that instead of, oh, I'm so sad your opponent won this election. No, I'm really sad that you lost this election.
Yeah.
That you're not the person that is sitting there right now. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I think the state of Florida has unfortunately really lost, is these really emotionally impactful candidates, the candidates that want to bring it home.
And that's something that this is where I really am confused, because DeSantis is not evoking any type of emotion outside of fear and anger and hatred. He's not making people feel warm and fuzzy. When you watch him speak, when you listen to the words that come out of his mouth, just like Trump, it's like fear mongering mixed with just angry rhetoric that I just don't understand why people gravitate towards that. Now, there is an argument to be made that during the election when he was going up against Charlie Crist was not evoking emotions either. I mean, he was so middle of the road, and
bland.
He was saying things that were mildly offensive and frankly was trying to play all sides at once. I think people got really confused on what he really stood for, because he wasn't coming out swinging on the things that Democrats typically are, like access to reproductive freedom, or, he wasn't speaking to migration. He wasn't speaking to climate or the environment. It was like, I don't even know what he really stood for. So I guess in a certain point, because my point was, why did people reelect DeSantis when the problems in a state where the Republicans have had a stronghold in power for 20 years, and yet we still have an affordability crisis, we still have a property insurance crisis? Well, if you put someone who's bland and has no heart and has no emotion or has no real platform running up against that, I can see why that person would be reelected, especially since voter turnout was super low on both sides that year. But people still came out, and you would think that the consultants that consulted on that race said Charlie Crist is going to have the Biden effect, which is he's moderate enough to not scare away those Republicans that are more in the middle, and yet he is now a Democrat. And so the Democrats are just all going to fall in line and vote because they hate DeSantis. And so he's better than the worst. The consultants keep bringing that to the table before they really bring a real agenda and a real message for candidates. Absolutely. So I'm just really confused why Republicans continue to vote for that, vote for anger. But then when I look at their option, it's either vanilla, no platform, no emotion, or anger, migrants are your problem, you need to be afraid of trans people making your kids trans.
Right. Well, honestly, if you ask me anything Charlie Crist stood for, I had no idea. I still have no idea. I'm still trying to figure out what it was. But yeah, I think that, this weird populism movement that we're seeing where people want to elect fighters, not just people that can be pushed and shoved over. I think that is something that we're really seeing in our elections. Yeah. Especially here in Florida. Trump won the state, and is because people thought that he was going to fight. And it was for really terrible stuff. But people thought that he was going to bring some type of change. I think that does go back into the conversation that we previously had. People elected Maxwell Frost to Congress because they thought that he was a transformative change leader. Mm-hmm. They elected Anna Eskamani for the same reasons. But the Florida Democrats that perform the worst in elections are people that are not vocal the most. Yeah. And that goes for Florida Republicans as well. Some of them do really terribly compared to Donald Trump, actually, at the ballot box, because they're not talking enough. They're not speaking out enough on issues that Republicans think are super important. Same goes for Democrats. So one of the things that I think that we need to do to actually win back this state is by electing people that actually care, people that have those emotional style campaigns like Andrew Gillum, but also people that will bring the fight to the forefront. Because there's so many lawmakers in Tallahassee that people don't know because they're not in clips. They're not actually really fighting for what their constituents want. Some of them even vote against their own Democratic constituents. Some of them voted for bills to restrict ballot initiatives in the state of Florida. Some of them voted for Florida Doge during everything that we saw nationally about Doge at town halls.
It doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense. Some of them voted for banning encampments for the unhoused.
And this is where, so another thing that consultants commonly talk about is really trying to speak to the blue voters that consistently come out and really targeting our base. But many times the youth are not counted in that because the youth either A, are brand new into the voting game, so we don't have years of data, if any data at all, if you just turned 18. And then the other thing is you don't, sometimes they don't vote in primaries. Sometimes, when they come out to vote, it's all across the board. And so I don't think they consider them a reliable turnout base and are usually discounted. But one thing in the last election that I loved was that I think our local area really prioritized outreach on the campuses and really worked hard to get that base up, and it worked. It paid off. How do we keep that momentum going, knowing that we are now in an affordability crisis that is making it really hard for people who are young to stay on top of what's going on in politics? And B, how do we keep the attention of the youth? Because so many people are saying that either their kids are just starting to turn off because they're thinking, well, Trump's just going to kill us all and screw us over to the point that why does anything matter anymore? Or it's just so overwhelming that there's this state of shock that people just they just can't even open their phone anymore because it's just so much all at once. And so tuning out is really the way that people can survive in this moment. So being that you're 21 years old, and I'm so sorry that you have to be so in tune. I'm so sorry that your youth is kind of being stolen from you, that you have to be this plugged in a time when you should be clubbing and partying and not paying attention to where our money is going in politics. What do we do to engage the youth for real? So
I think that first off, we need to create actual youth spaces.
Yeah.
Walking into a Democratic Party club, for example, where the average age is about like 55, 65, that's giving the benefit of the doubt to the Democratic Party because some spaces I've walked in, the average age is 70.
Yeah.
And they're Harvard lawyers and all this junk. Is very off-putting for actual young people to get in those spaces. And ensuring that, we do have a Young Democrats. We have a Sunrise Movement, for example, an actual youth-led advocacy network and support system, because ultimately these things are not just to elect Democrats, they're also support systems. Young Democrats is the epitome of the support system of people that, have politics on their minds, but also can become friends and just hang out and do those fun things that you mentioned. While also, we are unfortunately in this fight together. So my best friends in my life I've met through Florida Young Democrats. One of my best friends is the president statewide now, Kat Margot. So, it really is creating that actual support system, the ground structure, so that we can actually have young people involved in the fight. My number 2 issue that I do have is actually making sure that we are actually supporting young people actively. I have firsthand seen some really disgusting older male individuals say some really terrible things to young women in Democratic spaces. There was this incident where somebody statewide, who's a close friend of mine, she went to a campaign kickoff. I was there, and she was told by the local Hispanic caucus chair in her county that, let me break down a little bit. She was wearing an American flag on a crew neck with an American, like a flagpole. The Hispanic caucus chair, an old Hispanic guy, comes up to her and says, when are we going to see you on a pole? That is the exact type of stuff that a lot of older Democrats do say to people that are women. There are spaces in the LGBT organizing space where me as a younger organizer, I feel uncomfortable because some of the things that people would say are really scary stuff.
Sick.
I can't imagine, what they say to people even younger than I am. So, it's actually supporting young people by having accountability of our organizers, activists, etc. Some people just say absolutely disgusting and deplorable things, and then we vote to not kick them out of party leadership because we're so scared that losing them will make everything break. Well, some things are worth breaking the party for. I think that is something.
Yeah.
Because if you have a hostile infrastructure and environment, you're not going to bring more people in. You're going to scare them away. Quite literally scare them away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, that's kind of the clash between the younger generation and the older generation. There's something happening that I love, and I also feel bad for young people that we are more aware. We are, I guess the internet is partly to blame as much as it has its problems, but we are growing up with access to information that I think in rapid speed that our parents and grandparents didn't have at the youngest age.
Right.
And I think because of that, we're growing up expecting more. I think without our parents even really being the ones saying it, I think young people are hearing that you have value and that you can fight, depending on what algorithm they're being targeted with. But more commonly than not, I think young people are being exposed to things like, that's not okay that you said that to me. Or, wow, I didn't realize that huge event that happened in history led to where we are today. We're having all these epiphanies at such young ages, and now young people are demanding to be treated differently and to be treated better. And I think that's why older people gravitated towards, older white people gravitated towards Trump, because that clash is getting people really uncomfortable. And I think it's so interesting because, God, if we can just save the planet so that young people can come into power, I'd love to see the place where young people who are now learning about self-care at a young age and not being told you have to work to get that white picket fence. It's like, actually, I'm going to work and prioritize my mental health. Imagine a generation where men grew up being told you need to work but prioritize your mental health and be able to have balance and be able to be healthy and be able to, I feel like we would have the world we all deserve if we could get the young people now into positions of power.
Right.
But it's just, we are fighting the conservative, older white demographic that have been in power for generations. We are quickly coming upon their fear of losing that control.
Right. And, that ideology of work until you die still, I think, really impacts the democratic organizing space, especially for young people. There are tons of youth organizers that get really burnt out, leave organizing and go to journalism. Actually, it's a very interesting issue that does pop up a lot. And I think one of the saddest things about that is they were actually worked to honest to God death.
Yeah.
40 hours a week doing campus tabling that we saw at UCF, which was a real thing that a statewide PAC that was supposed to empower young people forced its youth organizers to do. It's ridiculous. It's absurd because they're also doing schoolwork. They're also emotionally building themselves. Lots of youth organizers don't actually have that many friendships or relationships outside of political organizing. Lots of them do. I do. But the bonds that we do have are strongest in this organizing space compared to anything else. So I think it's crazy that it's still in that perspective and ideology of work, work, work until you die is still actually impacting the youth organizing space. I know of many people, including myself, that have had breakdowns because of that mentality. Because all these older people that just sit there, write postcards, and then go to a club meeting and maybe will donate $50 every month or so, think that we actually are the saviors of democracy and that everything in democracy and the US government relies on us.
When their generation was able to have a one, income household and be able to afford a car, a house, all the bills. It's really interesting. But at the same token, I just think that young people right now, when they get into power, we have such an opportunity. I think that's why there's such a target with the right going into youth spaces like podcasts and all the things, because I think they made some gains among men where they don't want the youth to continue down this liberal track. They want the youth to kind of perpetuate what older people have been kind of feeling, which is this control over what the norm should be. And the clash, I think, it's really exciting because we have an opportunity to ask for more and demand more and to lift up people into politics right now who are going to be able to speak to that feeling in order to gravitate. If we keep going down the same path where we keep just playing middle of the road and we don't speak to our values wholeheartedly, like full-throated, people are going to expect more. I mean, Trump, a lot of people didn't take some of the things that he said seriously, but he was vocal through and through on what he wanted to do and what he wanted to say. And people say, well, I didn't vote for that. I didn't vote for that. He had people holding mass deportation signs at his rallies and said point blank, I could shoot someone, in New York on the street and not be punished. He was very honest about what he wanted to accomplish and was unabashful about it. And I think we need Democrats to do the same thing, but for all people, for working class people, and for a real agenda with policies that really matter. But with the Zoran Mondani thing, I think it's so interesting that Democrats are scared to coalesce around him in this moment. I think because they're afraid that it might be a ripple effect. If we applaud it, it might happen elsewhere. If we applaud someone who has ambitious ideas that take on corporate greed and take on corporate stronghold in our political system, that it might have a rippling effect. What's your take on Zoran and the fear that people have on the Democratic side?
Well, I was super hyped, of course, with Zoran's victory. I had been a DSA member for a few years now. I do remember when he first won his state assembly primary. He was actually primarying an incumbent, won a very close election. So seeing him go from, this like DSA little organizer to state assembly member to now mayor of the richest city and the most populous city in America is really incredible to see. I think that is definitely part of it, of, the ripple effect that definitely is happening nationally. I mean, it's already happening. We see youth progressives announce a new campaign for Congress like every 3 days, it feels like. We have a new one, and they're all super well ran. Like the commercials and ads, I think, do speak to that point I was bringing up earlier of actual emotion and invoking that in their campaigns. I think right now we're seeing what people thought the election of AOC was going to immediately lead to, and it didn't. It was actually Zoran. And I think that, of course, electing AOC led to Zoran, because Zoran would not be a thing without AOC at all. Right. But we're actually seeing for the first time the real benefit of electing people like AOC to Congress
Mm-hmm.
in terms of actually transforming our Democratic Party. I think they're also really scared about the corporate entities leaving them. I think that, there are a lot of New York Assembly members and congressional members that are going to face really competitive primaries because of this big momentum that the progressive movement is facing, especially in New York, that are really scared of endorsing and supporting Zoran because they think that entities like AIPAC are not going to fund them in their next election. I think that we're going to see that happen a lot. So I think it's absolutely amazing. I think that, we're already seeing this type of youth-led progressive populism really take up steam in the Democratic Party. And I think that Zoran's election, also alongside, the removal of David Hogg, for example, as vice chair of the Democratic Party, is going to seriously solidify this movement that I think lots of progressives have been waiting for years.
Yeah.
And I think that, we do have some congressional candidates like Elijah Manley, who's running in South Florida, who I think do embody that national movement. But down on the local level, we're not seeing that so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that we got to do to actually fix the state and harness the youth electorate that we do have.
Well, the thing is that the opportunity to bring in Republicans is in the progressive movement. That's something that I don't think people realize. I think they feel like they need to be so on the nose by literally converting a Republican like Charlie Crist into a Democrat to get the buy-in of a Republican, right? Or campaigning with Liz Cheney. Like, they have to be so on the nose, holding hands with like someone who frankly does not align with our values as Democrats as much, but in order to feel like they can, that's the avenue to bring in Republicans that aren't extreme MAGA, right? But what I believe is when you have a real agenda, and let's break that down, what that means specifically. When you say, I'm done with the corporate influence in our political system because it is leading to elected officials not representing you. And this could be a platform that a Democrat or a Republican could say. Yeah. And they say, and our family's health and the ability to live in prosperity, our quality of life is contingent upon real leaders who are going to say no to those companies that are trying to suck every penny out of us and keep us working until we die in an unhealthy way. And being able to find a way to make that relevant to your community, right? So with Commissioner Semrad, who I have the honor of working with, she was overwhelmingly elected by Democrats and Republicans because she talked about diversifying our TDT. Now let's look at how that compares to Trump saying that there's fraud in our government, right? Right now, our tourism development tax is going towards subsidizing mega corporate entities within our tourism industry, like the Hilton, the Marriott, Disney, Universal, by putting hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing funds through Visit Orlando and Visit Florida in order to market these industries specifically to attract tourism. Okay, we could be using those dollars to help make tourism here more pleasant for not just Disney, who, by the way, has awesome transit at the parks, but actively worked to make sure we didn't have good quality multimodal transit because they don't want it to be easy for tourists to leave their parks. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about to a Republican who's sitting in traffic for hours away from their family every day or have to pay $10 a day on the toll roads to get to and from their job, and say, our common enemy is the industry that made it so that our roads are failing and is not trying to share the wealth in our local economy, nor pay people a living wage so that they can also prosper and that your neighborhoods could be safer and that we all could have better quality of life together. That message could be replicated across Democrats and Republicans, and that is a progressive message. Absolutely. When people, and I really feel like moderate Democrats, hear the word progressive, I think they just think I'd love to hear what you've been told in your movement work. I think they think you'll never be able to tax wealth at that level. People will never go for it. And I think they think that all of our ideas are just like fantasies, just so far out there, clickbait. When Bernie will be the first one to list off every major company that has access to like out healthcare or what have you. But I think the moderates, let me know what you've heard in your work. But like, I just think people don't take us seriously because we're so deprived of those policies that other major countries across the world have had the pleasure of having for generations, that they look at us as just these daydreamers.
I think that we're also unfortunately deprived of this idea that I've been pushing for years now called radical compassion.
Right.
And in my organizing experience as a progressive, as a fighter, I've been called some really crazy stuff. I've been called anti-Semitic for believing in a ceasefire, and actual humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, because I do not think what is going on in Gaza benefits Israeli people. It's not in the defense of Israeli people. It's actually killing them as well. It is killing people overall in the Middle East. I've been called anti-Semitic for it. And it's been really insane to me to see in the past few days the same people that were saying that type of thing finally understand that children are starving in Gaza, and that some people that are starving are also actually Israeli kids. So I think that people don't fully understand the level of compassion that the progressive movement is really embedded in until they see how that compassion actually is important.
Right.
And how, if we had more compassion in our policy decisions, we're not going to have people that are passed out off the side of the road.
Right.
Because they don't have a house. We're not going to see the starving of children in Gaza. We're not going to see, our forests get completely ripped apart. If we just had more compassionate lawmaking. And I think that is what the progressive movement really is. And I always think about, Bernie Sanders always, being joyful and fighting for people and having this small little bird come to his podium. That was the exact type of progressive I was really raised with. Was this progressive that actually seriously wanted to fight for people, but also wanted to understand people.
Yeah.
So I think people have now thought that our movement is radical, and I think it is radical, but it's radical in this thought of actual compassion in governance.
Yeah.
And I don't think that some people fully understand that until they actually talk to people like me. I've been other progressive organizers and, so-called progressive organizers in the state of Florida have gone up to me and said that the Democratic Progressive Caucus has issues of anti-Blackness and anti-Semitism. And I think that is a perfect representation of how people think that the progressive movement has gone, but really isn't. The progressive movement is fighting for justice for all. And I think that we just need to message that more as a movement. We have to stop seeming like a movement that is just on the offense all the time.
Yeah.
We need to hold our Democratic electeds accountable for sure. I'm going to call them out. I'm going to call out the Democratic candidates that take all the corporate money that is a stain on our system. But, I think that we have a unique opportunity, especially here in Florida, to cultivate a progressive movement that is recognized as the movement for compassion and understanding, and will, of course, hold you accountable, but want you to do better.
Right.
I think that's the difference that, some folks have definitely just not thought about recently.
And what do you say to the other side, the people who are progressive, who are coming into their voting age and they want every candidate to be a Bernie Sanders, or they come out really, really holding that bar higher than I think most candidates can really jump to. Like I have to be realistic with my expectations because I know that running for office is really hard. Yeah. And finding a good candidate that A, is just really good at people skills or is good at communicating. Like there's so many factors, can afford to run for office, whose family dynamic would allow them, that are privileged enough to have the ability to run for office. I mean, there's so many factors that limit someone's ability to actually run. And then you have some folks on the far, far, far left, I feel, who it just feels like it's never good enough, honestly, that I wish I could like extend out to them and say, like, I'm with you. I want the things that you want. But we also have to calibrate, because if a Dem runs, and I have to have these arguments with myself when I see, a candidate running and they're really the only option that I have. Where I choose to take that anxiety out is to get involved with campaigns and to help with recruitment and to wrap resources around the candidates that I want to see representing me. And that's how I have a hand in it. But I can't find that perfect match of a candidate in every race. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a balance where we hold candidates accountable, but we also have to be realistic, because I think what we do is we lose people who are on the left, who want the best of the best of the best option. They're not seeing a ton of those rise to the surface. And frankly, I've seen people come out with pitchforks against Anna and Maxwell and Carlos. Like, I think our best of the best option that we have, still people show up angry, coming for them for not doing enough or saying enough. So I'm just curious, like, what's your message to those people, being that you are kind of a progressive leader right now, for the people that probably feel so disenfranchised by this movement?
Well, I understand both sides of the argument. I really do. There are decisions by certain lawmakers that really do hurt me on a whole different level. And there are some lawmakers I definitely think, because of that, should be held accountable. But, I do understand that we're not in the best state in the world. We really aren't. Not even in the best city or county in the world.
Well, just to add one more thing, even on the federal level, I had people tell me, I'd rather see Trump than Kamala, because if we continue to get more of the same in, and we continue to vote and say that's acceptable, especially around Gaza, if we continue to vote for a moderate Democrat and continue to reward them with my vote, then they are being told that them being middle is continuing to be okay, that they'd rather see Trump than see that middle of the road candidate.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of it is just the overall hatred of the establishment that we've definitely seen.
Yeah.
I'm always going to support harm mitigation.
Yeah.
I'm always going to, because while I do not think that all of us are free until all of us are actually free,
right?
I do seriously think that, we are at a time when we do need that harm mitigation to really happen. Because, it is going to be a waking disaster for every single group if, Republicans do continue to take power. But, my real statement to people that think that mentality and that mindset is run for office.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of these people that
call
say
them
those
on their
types of
bluff.
things. Right. Because I get it. I'm with you, but please run for office. I want more people who have your mentality and mindset to actually run for office and be in elected office, and then be able to actually fight like hell for the change that we need. I've become so disillusioned with those types of organizers because I just wish they ran for something.
Yeah.
Some of the best people that I think could be like a Florida Zoran are in that movement.
Yep.
And I think it's really saddening that they haven't been awakened to this idea that maybe they could be the person that runs against the harm mitigation candidate in a primary.
Yeah.
That's something that I think is really saddening. I think it is still a persistent issue in Florida, but of course nationally. So I'm just really hoping that, Zoran's win does make those people that have been complaining for so long to actually run. Because, we will have more infrastructure to support people like that and people that have that mentality. Zoran used to criticize Barack Obama beyond belief, and rightfully so, on a lot of really important issues like what was going on in Libya, for example.
Yeah.
Perfectly, understandable. And then he ran for office.
Yeah, I guess where we're in the Democrat organizing space where we're discouraged to come out against folks is that it's also a scarcity mindset of like, and this is probably exactly what happened with Joe Biden. Republicans always seem to fall in line. Even if there's contention in the party and there's frustrations in the party, it's never enough to fracture it or break it.
Yeah.
Because it almost feels like the bar that Republicans set for Republicans is much lower than the bar that Democrats set for each other. And that could be on either side of moderate, liberal, or conservative, blue dog Dems. Like, it always feels like there's more criticism from within to the point where we have folks. I know I was personally door knocking and I had blue Dems on my list for sure, doing just a turnout list. And I had folks say, I'm done voting. I'm done. I'm not going to come to the table anymore. But it feels like Republicans will vote even against their best interests if they have a single issue that they're so passionate about, like abortion, that motivates them to the poll. And that's where I know I, as a progressive, get the most friction, is people say, pipe down your criticisms, pipe down your frustration with corporate money. We just got to win. And that's what matters. It's just winning. And in my argument, I've spent so much as an activist, so much time fighting Democrats. Crying at Board of County Commission meetings, begging people to not put a toll road through a forest or to not send people to our jail system so that they can just completely be kidnapped off the street. Like, I've been on the front lines of fighting Dems that we just had to get elected so that someone worse didn't get in there, and they still didn't vote in line with our values. And somebody needs to push, even though it's really hard.
Yeah. And, there's a big difference between a Democratic politician or elected that is in a safe Democratic district, a district that should always vote Democrat, hopefully.
Yeah.
Versus a competitive lawmaker. And what we actually see in Tallahassee, at least, is the safe Democratic lawmakers are actually the most conservative ones in some spaces in some counties.
Yep.
That is ridiculous. We have a lawmaker in South Florida that's still actually in the state house that was going to vote against she was going to vote for Don't Say Gay.
Wow.
And the House caucus had to pull her aside and be like, what the hell are you doing? We have a lawmaker in Jacksonville who actually got primaried by Angie Nixon. She actually ran for a different seat and now is back in the state house. That just this session spoke in a committee meeting that was very, very anti-abortion in her comments. Those are the type of lawmakers we have. And then I look at lawmakers like Leonard Spencer, who, there are definitely some things that I do disagree with, but he's voted more consistently with the Democrat caucus than some of these safe Dem lawmakers, and blows my mind that is the type of situation that we're in locally, where some of these safe seat Democrats are some of the worst Democrats, and actually some of the competitive Democrats honestly are probably some of the best.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me, but then you of course look at the fact that big money banks roll them into office. And we just had that mentality and that mindset that, oh, well, they can win. We might as well not primary or fight them. We're scared of primaries in the state of Florida. And I think that needs to go.
And somehow winning becomes the enemy of the good, because I think at a certain point, and I don't know if Chair Freed has actually done this, but I know that I felt this from when I was working with Carlos Guillermo Smith from the party as a whole. It's kind of like, we have to win because we need to be able to go back to the donors and prove that we put their money to good use. And it's almost like that self-fulfilling prophecy prioritizes like what we all are supposed to be in this work for in the first place, is fighting for people and fighting for our communities. But if we're all so stressed out about just wanting to get a candidate to win, that we're kind of disregarding candidate quality and the platform that they are supposed to be fighting for, then that's where we get more Joe Manchins and, Kristen Sinemas that derail our agenda, which could then have an impact, frankly, on getting a Trump elected. If Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin would have voted better to help progress Joe Biden's agenda, I feel like people would have felt more economic relief and would have been able to feel direct impacts quicker from Joe Biden's agenda. They kidnapped it and held it hostage and voted against a $15 minimum wage and other things that then hurt us and probably led partly to a Trump reelection. Yeah, absolutely. But we just had to win.
Yeah. And, I think one of the biggest donor pitches that are very few Democrats in the state House and state Senate do use, and one of the biggest donor spikes that they do witness is when they actually get something passed. And believe it or not, it's mostly our most progressive lawmakers that actually do get bills done.
I mean, they're working their butts off.
Right. State Senator Smith and Representative Harris passed, this really amazing bill this legislative session to ensure that, kids that, have allergic reactions, for example, don't just die, provide them more protections. And, I just thought about all the social media posts I saw about that, which is, a bill that like should be common sense and is, right? But I saw how impressed people were in their social media comments. I imagine it was a really good fundraising email for both of them to say that, as a result of me being elected, this is a bill that should be common sense, that passed, that will save kids' lives. So, I think about how, we do actually have a lot of progressive lawmakers that do get a lot of stuff done. And because of that, then you do have results. You have results of them being in office. And that's the difference, is that you have results of election results versus results of actually being in power. And to me, I would much rather take the results from being in power and actually impacting people over than, oh, I got 48% of the vote in this election and Harris got 45%.
Well, there's also another level of power, and that's the soft power. That's the, after you get elected, the person who's going to roll up their sleeves, show up to everything, do cleanups and go beyond just the legislative part of their role, answer the phone for constituents, whether they're their constituents or not, or Democrats or Republicans, like actually be the ones leading on the constituent services, being at every protest, organizing protests. I mean, I think that is another way that progressives and moderates are different, is that progressives, and I don't know if it's just because the odds are so stacked behind us that we have to work twice as hard, but they will show up and fight and work and be so accessible to their base before and after they win, that was one thing I noticed about Carlos. He always gave out his personal cell. I thought he was crazy. Yeah. He didn't have another phone. He always gave out his personal cell to everyone. Okay. So that even means people who are against him. His business card had his personal cell on it. So that's just kind of the difference is the soft power can definitely lead to long-term change to benefit the Democratic Party. Yeah. Carlos had such soft power that when he ran for Senate, he didn't even have any opposition. Yeah. And he raised a crazy amount of money, but he was not even considered to be challenged because his soft power was so saturated in this area that it would be 4 times as much money to try and beat him.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. I mean, so many Democratic elected officials kind of just run away.
They disappear.
They disappear, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, we have a very impressive state legislative delegation for the most part here in Orange County.
We're very lucky.
We're very lucky. And I know that is not the situation in some other counties like Hillsborough County, for example, where some of their lawmakers barely show up. You know, they have amazing leaders like Lear Driscoll, but some of their lawmakers just skip out of town. And that does happen, especially in places like South Florida, you know, which are very competitive areas. The most competitive
South Florida
areas,
has so much opportunity.
Exactly. And, you know, the most competitive areas in the state are where Democratic politicians are absent when they actually get to office the most. I don't know that many people actually in South Florida that have met their state representative or their state senator. And that's insane to me. Because I feel like I see Carlos every 3 days.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. You know,
he comes to things that he doesn't need to be at.
Yeah,
like every potluck and every, you know, it's like there is a balance. You know, we need our lawmakers to also have self-care and be able to take a vacation and be able to have good mental health and not experience burnout. That's very real. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's candidates, Democrats and Republicans, that become elected officials. And it's like, you can't get a meeting with them to save your life. They never show up even to the low hanging fruit, like town halls or any, they're not even hosting town halls.
No.
And we're in a moment where people are literally being taken off the street.
Yeah.
Democrats and Republicans are being kidnapped. Where's Buddy Dyer?
Yeah.
Where's Jerry Demings? And when I say where, I don't mean on the dais. I mean, like, we need someone who is front and center hosting press conferences. This is like, to me, equal level to COVID. Yeah. When COVID hit, there were press conferences every week giving the status and the updates and the numbers, and people were very scared and they wanted a leader to help them understand, where can I get PPE? What, you know, as a small business, how do I format, you know, a vaccine mandate, or how do I, you know, self-govern? How do I stay safe and keep my family safe? Our leaders who have been in power for a long time on the Democratic side could be wielding this moment, which would also solidify our power here. Because if we see Democrats showing up and leading right now, when people are so scared, they will vote Democrat next election, right? But if they say, oh, I voted for Buddy Dyer for 20 years straight and my wife was just deported, you know, like, what the heck? I think people might say, where's my elected officials that I thought were supposed to be out there protecting me?
Yeah. And, you know, we elected all these politicians into power because we ultimately wanted them to keep us safe and actually fight for our neighbors and our community members. And unfortunately, some, especially in the municipal office world, some Democrats are completely ignoring that because they want to stay in office longer. And to politicians that are retiring already in 2027, I can't understand for a second why you would just not take the removal from office. That is your legacy, is that you stayed in office for a few more months and voted against all this terrible, terrible human rights abuses, and get removed. But you at least saved a few hundred people's lives. Yeah. By not voting to send them to Alligator, Alcatraz, and other concentration camps that are being built in the state of Florida. I think that is the mentality that young voters and the progressive movement seriously want, is the people that will take the removal and take, losing re-election. Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky perfectly said in response to people that were concerned that his vetoes of anti-trans legislation would result in him losing, he said firmly, some things are worth losing re-election for. Yeah. And that is the mentality that I think the Democratic Party needs to actually talk to young people again. Yeah. Is that some issues, including human rights, are worth losing re-election for.
Absolutely. And I feel like, let's just pretend that, we're not so empathetic that really we're looking at this from a strategic standpoint. Like, we're consultants, right? Getting removed would be the best thing to do to kick off a fundraiser for whatever next endeavor that you're trying to do. If you're trying to run for Congress or whatever next thing you want to do, it's a fight not only for human rights worth fighting for, but it's a fight that can help leverage your popularity, your legacy for whatever next thing that you want to do. I don't know where you're going to be able to go if you sit back and you're quiet in this moment and then you go to run for something later, or who knows, maybe people are just trying to continue to cash a check until they just slip into the, Bahamas and disappear forever. But I would like to believe from a strategic standpoint that someone is in a room saying, please go hard, because no matter what the outcome, this is your opportunity to lead, and it can benefit you even if you're removed. Some comments that I heard on the Board of County Commission with Orange County was, well, you want to be represented by someone and that you elected. And if I was removed, then someone worse would be appointed, and then you would have to deal with them. Okay. And then they're going to sell out, and they're going to continue to perpetuate kidnapping people. And then what's going to end up happening is people are going to show up in droves even more when you go to run again, or like we did with Monique Worrell. Yeah. It's a perfect example. Yeah. So I'm really excited for this progressive movement that you have taken the reins of and have injected your energy. My last question for you that I'm going to ask every guest moving forward is, what is one thing that you do with all the anxiety and all the fear? What is one thing that you do to either decompress or channel that anxiety?
Every year, since I've really, really gotten involved, I've been going to a music festival. Nice. And music is definitely how I decompress and, try to stay calm. Yeah. So 2023, I went to Rolling Loud, Miami, which was really fun. Got my phone stolen, which is unfortunately a very common problem that I now face for some reason. This has happened to me 3 times now where my phone got stolen somewhere. But I went to Lollapalooza 2024, went to Lollapalooza again. And then 2025, probably going to Camp Flog Gnaw, which is Tyler, the Creator's music festival in Los Angeles.
That'll be fun.
Big Tyler, the Creator fan.
Yeah, his new album just came out.
Yeah. Which is good. So I try to decompress from that. I try to watch movies too. My Letterboxd has been really inactive though.
What's your Letterboxd?
It's Matt with 1 T X 1804. So MAT.
You heard it here, folks.
1804, where you can probably see a lot of very stupid reviews I made back in 2023. But that's kind of how I try to relax, is to, watch and participate in like creative arts because that's something I really do
What's
love.
your top 3 artists right now?
Oh, okay. This guy that used to be a YouTube rapper actually, and used to play like FIFA. His name is Quadeca. Quadeca now makes really beautiful like just music. Like it is rap, pop, but also like super like intense like instrumental music. His last album that just came out actually a few days ago is this like really interesting work about like sailing and somehow like being kicked off the ship and like drowning and stuff. It's a really perspective like album, really cool album actually. It's beautiful. He's been great. He's been making a lot of amazing music since like 2023, especially 2022. I'd still say Tyler the Creator is like my number 2. I just love how open he is about himself and like how he's been able to really build like this nerdy, quirky generation of like younger people to have their own like identity and like really stand up for themselves. I think it's really cool. His music's
and
amazing.
He's openly gay in rap, which is like almost still to this day kind of unheard of. It's so frustrating, but he's leading the way, leading the charge of that voice, which is really awesome. Yeah.
He's definitely like amplified a whole generation of like young queer, like especially Black men, to actually like understand who they are
and still be cool and still sell out like
way cooler than some people.
Like still sell out crazy concerts and still be like kind of campy, nerdy, but still like gangsta as hell.
And then my third is JPEG Mafia. I love JPEG Mafia. He's this socialist veteran from Maryland, who I have now seen like 4 times now live. He's just really good. He's very outspoken about the issues and like politics. But he also just makes really good music that he self-produces. All 3 of these artists like actually self-produce all their music, which is really cool, because so many people don't do it. But I think it really showcases like the dedication that they do. They do amazing live performances.
This is where I feel AI is really going to flatline, because I think people really gravitate towards that unpolished. Well, not that they're not polished, but still has the human touch to it, so that you can realize that it's, unless AI evolves to the point where it even evolves that way, where you can't tell.
Scary.
Which is scary.
Very scared about that. But yeah, no, I think like all 3 artists really showcase like human nature. And Tyler, I've known for years. And like my first concert, I think was it was his Igor like album. I think that was like right before or right after COVID. I completely forget now. But like seeing Tyler grow up from like this super like offensive artist that like had this whole group around him to now like kind of just being by himself and like self-producing all of his music and being less offensive, and speaking about issues like queerness, for example, and like capitalism and stuff. It's a really cool like growth to like witness, and I think that that's something that AI can never ever do. Is that actual like following and like, hey, like I knew them when they're in this stage of life to like now they're here and like they've matured and stuff. So it's completely different.
Well, I'm so excited to see your evolution and your growth, because you're only 21. Still baffles my mind to say out loud. And like we keep bringing up in a common theme in this, there's such opportunity to really create a movement. People are hungry for it. More and more people are signing up for things, getting outside of their comfort zone, leaving their house to go to protests and to get involved. And so I know that you're going to wield that power and become greater and greater in the work that you do. You're an artist in this work. I think organizing is really hard, but so is self-producing an album, right? And I feel like you're going to become a leading voice in Florida politics across the state, if even more so than you are now. So I'm just so honored and grateful for you having this time. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great night.
Bye.